The leaves crunched as I walked along the vast, beautiful forest. The blinding sun shone ever so brightly in the sky, setting ever so slowly over the horizon. A breezy wind blew through the forest, singing a quiet song in my ears as I continued to walk. I could hear the sound of animals scurrying through the forest, giving life to the terrain that Mother Nature ever so graciously built. As I navigated my way through the forest, I looked around at all the shady trees as I jumped over all the logs that lay on the ground. I imagined the life each tree had had, how many people throughout history had walked the same path I was. Each tree was a story to be told, each as old as nature itself. I was a big thinker as a kid, always asking my parents questions about how the world worked. I was always in my head, wandering around the worlds that I created. Worlds of cities built with bright diamonds, fantasy lands where I was the hero of my own tale. Nature was my escape from everything. I would imagine myself fighting the ferocious beasts that I had created in my head, or that I was on an adventure to Mordor with Frodo. This time, I imagined I was walking on the Death Trail in search of an ancient treasure buried by Blackbeard himself. I fought devilish beasts whose teeth could destroy a whole tree with a single bite, a dragon whose eyes shined with crimson and breathed fire as hot as the sun. The forest was my favorite place to think, for this inviting evergreen forest was beautiful in every way. The sound of squirrels chattering could be heard as the birds sang their final song, for the sun was setting slowly on the horizon. Bright, vibrant colors filled the sky. The forest sparkled as sunlight crackled across the trees, lighting up the dirt path ahead of me, decorated with roots and flowers of many kinds. It was lively. The sound of scurrying could be heard on every side. The leaves and twigs crunched under my feet, and the branches hung as if they were welcoming me. I breathed gracefully, my body feeling a slight chill as I walked through the path. I was deep inside my imagination when the sound of water took me out of my thoughts. I always hated that sound. It meant that soon I'd have to turn back. I continued my way, trying to ignore the sound, but it was becoming increasingly harder as I reached the river. I slowed my pace, trying to prolong my journey back home. It wasn't long, though, until I saw the sparkling blue river, the sound of crashing water filling my ears as I reached my endpoint. I stopped and cleaned off my arms and hands from the dirt that always found its way onto my body. I felt the water flow through my hands as I looked through the water in the tree line. I would always turn back at the river, for my fear of drowning kept me at bay. I would sometimes walk along that river, dipping my hands into the water as I walked. Something in me didn't feel fear of the water that day, though. I felt adventurous. I contemplated as I looked beyond the river stream. There was a whole other part of the forest beyond it, new lands to be discovered. I looked up at the sky. The sun was almost over the horizon. I thought about being out here at night, thoughts of monsters and creatures capturing me. I remembered my stories, though, the hero who saved the world from danger. Suddenly, without a second thought, it was like my body just got up and began to jump on the rocks in the river. I felt the water on my feet as I stopped on each of the rocks before jumping to the next. Once I reached the other side, I quickly ran into the forest beyond. I walked along as I studied the trees to get a good idea of my surroundings to find my way back. I made landmarks on trees out of chalk and always carry some with me so I wouldn't get lost, something I always do when traveling new terrain. Something about this area felt off, though. It was as if Mother Nature had left, leaving her creations in ruin. It was a lot darker than I thought it would be. There were so many trees that it blocked out the sun. I was a fearless kid, though. I thought that I couldn't be harmed, for nature was my dearest friend. I was wrong, though, for no one is safe from the brutality of Mother Nature, not even me. As I walked through the forest, I looked ahead to get a good map of the terrain in my head. Shadows gathered around the forest as the dark trees hung over me like limbs from an ancient world. There was an ominous silence that filled the woods, no sounds of animals running around, no crickets or frogs chirping, no wind twirling in my ears, just pure and utter silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as I walked. I noticed a tree that looked like a hideous witch, its gnarled limbs and black claws stretching over me, almost serving as a warning not to go any further. This was a tree that had died many years ago from the look of it, succumbing to nature's life cycle. I stared at it for a few minutes, feeling an uneasiness that crawled at the back of my throat. I continued my journey across the uncharted forest, but the tree stayed embedded in my mind. There was a feeling of dread that I fought off as my heart felt uneasy. The forest seemed dead, as if it was abandoned long ago. Stumps were scattered across the forest grounds. The clumps of bushes lay among the stumps. Twigs snapped from my feet. The brown trees were so close to each other, forming a thick canopy. It was barely bright enough for me to see ahead, yet I did not stop. There was a mixture of feelings that I felt I couldn't describe. One thing was for sure, though. It felt as if I was being watched. It was like the trees had eyes of their own and were watching me very closely. My senses widened, my skin tingling. I breathed deeply and listened with great intensity. My instincts were telling me that something was off, a deep feeling that crept over me like a beast. I kept looking behind me to make sure nothing was following me, scanning my surroundings with great efficiency. That's when something caught my eye. Straight ahead, deep in the forest, barely in eyesight, stood a tall, dark figure that peered at me from behind a tree. I was paralyzed in shock, gripped by the sudden strong urge of fear that froze my entire body as I stared at whatever was ahead of me. I couldn't make out any features. It was so dark that I couldn't see the mysterious figure clearly. It felt as though our eyes were locked together, but I couldn't even see its eyes. It felt like it was staring right through my soul. I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind, but everything in me told me otherwise. It just stood there, staring at me. My body couldn't move. I tried to, but my brain had just shut off. As I looked at this creature, everything about it just didn't seem right. Its arms were so long that one of them touched the ground. The other wrapped around the tree. Its head had a weird shape to it, as if it was stretched out. The creature stood incredibly tall. It had to be at least 9 feet. It was skinny, as if it was just pure bones and nothing else. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like two intelligent beings staring at each other. Somehow it felt even quieter than it had before, silence creeping down my whole body, paralyzing me. Everyone has a fight-or-flight reflex, but in some instances, when a human reaches a new level of fear they've never felt before, they just freeze. You try to move, but it's like you're being gripped by an invisible force, every instinct in you telling you to run, but you just can't. Even though I've fought every monster and beast in my head, when faced with real danger, I didn't fight. All I could feel was fear. Fear of the unknown, the certainty of death. A cold chill filled the air. Even with no wind, it got colder. My body violently shook, legs trembling with pure dread and fear. I felt the thing looking me up and down, as if it were studying me. Neither of us made a single move, as if it too was paralyzed. Sweat dripped down my face. I breathed heavily as a panic attack began to emerge out of the darkening pit of my hell, dragging me down as it threatened to devour me. Suddenly, the creature quickly disappeared behind the tree. The sudden movement caused my brain to snap out of its paralysis, and my legs started moving. It was like my primal instinct kicked in, instincts given to us from our primal ancestors. My mind was racing with thoughts as I wondered what it was I had just seen. I was trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, but everything in me told me that something was not right. I could hear my own heartbeat as it tried to claw its way up my chest. Keep going straight. Soon you should see a large tree that has vines wrapped around it. Once you reach that, turn right, and you should see a tree with white chalk. Keep running towards that until you see the stump that you almost fell over. Make another right and keep going forward, I thought to myself, mapping out the forest in my head. My skills of navigation have never helped me before like this, and I was running and thinking at such a speed that I was hurting both my head and my legs. I started to smell a foul stench, something that smelled like a rotten corpse. It filled the forest, and I nearly gagged once it poured into my nose. A clicking noise surrounded me, fast and animalistic. I started to hear something in the forest running behind me, footsteps sounding heavy and fast. I looked back for a second to see if I could see whatever was chasing me, but all I could see was the dark open forest. I looked back and continued my way towards the river. I weaved my way through the forest quickly, making sharp lefts and rights and turning my way back to safety. My legs felt like they were going to break. My heart was hammering at my chest as my lungs were set ablaze. I listened to the sound of running behind me. The clicking was even closer and louder than before. The smell even stronger and fouler. It, too, knew how to navigate the forest as I did, maybe even better. My skin felt cold as I shook to the point where I almost fell many times, but I always caught myself just in time. Make a sharp right turn once you reach the dead tree. Once you see the rock that stands tall, make a left and keep running straight. It was like my mind was on adrenaline too, thinking at such a pace that I never thought I could before. The running behind me sounded even closer, the stench even stronger. My legs felt as if they were going to break, yet my speed still stayed the same as I used every ounce of energy I had. A familiar sound filled my ears, a sound I've always hated and despised. It was the river. It was close. I ignored the pain I felt in my legs and continued to run as whatever was behind me was catching up. My heart was beating like a war drum. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. My chest felt as if someone was squeezing my internal organs together, my feet burning from the many blisters I had. I ignored it all, though, and continued to guide myself through the cruelty of Mother Nature. I began to see the river stream. I was approaching it rapidly. My legs felt numb, my lungs on fire as I breathed heavily out of the exhaustion of fear. It sounded like it was only a few feet behind me. I knew that if I didn't reach the river, then it would catch me soon. The clicking sound was basically right in my ear. The stench was so strong that I gagged. I used every ounce of energy I had to run even quicker, ignoring all the pain I felt in my body. I hurtled out of the forest once I reached the river and jumped my way across the rocks that stuck out, falling onto my knees once I reached the other side. I quickly got back up and began to run again. I didn't stop running until my body collapsed, not being able to move. I hadn't noticed that it had turned to night, a dark umbra surrounding the forest. I was too exhausted to move. Every breath struck my chest deep. Yet there was no sign of anything chasing me or this foul smell that had followed me. The sound of wind and nature filled my ears again, replacing the terrifying clicking noises. Tears began to slowly drip down my face, mixing with my sweat. I opened my mouth to let out a whimper that never came, too exhausted to even make a sound. I wanted to go home, back to where my mother was. I started to breathe even heavier, my heart beating so fast that it was like having a heart attack. Everything became fuzzy and blurry, my mind racing with thoughts that only made me panic worse. I shook rapidly. I felt gripped by a sudden force that squeezed my body tight. My chest pounded in pain. It felt as if everything was being smashed by a hammer. I felt an impending doom dragging me down into deep darkness, deeper than any pit of despair I'd ever known. I tried to catch my breath, but it was just too much for me. I thought that whatever chased me would find me and devour my very soul. Everything was so loud, it felt like I was trapped in a tornado. I felt like I was going to throw up from the dizziness. My muscles were tense. The world was spinning around me as my heart started to pound worse than it ever had before. The pain from my chest slowly spread to my shoulders, giving a sharp pain in both of them. I got chills all over my body, gripped in fear and anxiety that had its hold on me and wouldn't let go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going to die a gruesome and horrifying death. I looked at the night sky as if it was in the hands of death and noticed how beautiful it looked. The pale crescent moon shone like a silver claw in the night sky. I looked upon the vast sea of stars, shining so brightly like little diamonds in the sky. Everything slowly went quiet. It was like the earth stopped. I felt the summer green grass on my hands and looked at the trees that surrounded me. Fireflies filled the darkness, sparkling like precious valuable stars in that dark place. The sound of crickets could be heard all around, chirping their song in replacement of the birds singing. My heart slowly started beating in a steady rhythm, and my breath slowed to a smooth pace. I breathed in a smell that was a woodsy fragrance, letting go of all my worries. It was as if Mother Nature cradled me in her arms, reassuring me that everything was all right. I felt a moment of tranquility, my mind silenced. I lay on the earth, admiring the beauty of the world around me. I slowly stood up, ignoring the pain I felt in my legs and chest. I welcomed back the blossoming, fragrant forest as I walked slowly through Mother Nature's creation. I began to walk home, admiring every inch of it that surrounded me. I always imagined the beautiful land in my head, landscapes of fantasy filled with bright colors. I never realized that I was already in a dazzling world filled with so many mysteries to be discovered. The forest was breathtaking tonight, sparkling in the moonlight like little crystals. I wasn't in my head on the walk home. My mind was silent for a change. Brown trees stood tall. The flowers bloomed, engulfing the forest in a smell so lush and fresh. I thanked Mother Nature that night, for she taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. I'm not invincible. I'm no hero or great warrior. I'm just a child. Not every story needs a hero, and I don't have to be the hero in every story. I walked my way home, embracing the forest for the first time.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you enjoy the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky stuff we do here. Maybe leave a comment too if you feel so inclined. Me, and of course the algorithm, always like when you interact. How about another video? I'm sure you could be down for that. Why not click on one of the videos above and get a little more spooky today? If you'd be interested in getting a copy of my latest book, there's a link below. There's also a link to my Reddit page where you can read some of my other stories that I've put out. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our wonderful patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. And thanks to Xaronana, Emily Coltsfoot, Leslie Lou Riddle, Martha, and Marianne Schuler for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks to you all. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the show, then I always recommend you come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can take advantage of all the wonderful things we do there. There's all kinds of unique content that you only get if you're part of my Patreon, so come on down and see what all the fuss is about. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.